You don't have to ask any questions, by the way. Yes, sir.
When you were an atheist, what was your theory of the existence of the world?
Well, when I was an atheist, what was my theory of the existence of the world?
Yeah, and why did you reject it? Like, how could you keep a consistent explanation of the world's existing without rejecting your previous theories?
Well, when I was an atheist, I couldn't quite hear the question, but I heard the first part. When I was an atheist, when people of a religious nature used to ask me, well, who created the world? You know the response. I said, who do you think created the world? They said, God. And then you know what I would say. Who created God? They would say, no, God has always been. And then I'd say, well, why couldn't the universe have always been? So that was my explanation. It's not like I just read it and said, aha. It was so powerful, it was so infinite. And I felt, finally, that God had spoken to me through the Quran and opened a spirituality up inside me that awakened me to a spirituality I thought I never had. I mean, that experience was so dramatic and powerful. I couldn't live without that in my life. Are you following? The Quran. I continued to read it daily from there on after. After a while, it became clear to me that it's strange how it actually happened. I won't go into detail here. But to make a long story short, it was obvious that I had to join the community that honored that scripture. But that was a difficult time, joining that community, because it's dominated by many foreign cultures, depending on what mosque you go to, and they have their own particular cultural perspective on things, and they often equate that with the revelation itself, and that could be very exasperating and frustrating for somebody coming from the outside. But I won't go into that in detail. But nonetheless, it's because of the love of that, that whole experience, and the role that the Quran has played. I had to stay close to that.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you told when you were in Purdue University, you did get into Buddhism, Hinduism, and things like that.
Say that again.
When you were in Purdue University,
yes,
you came across the faith in Hinduism, Buddhism, and things like that. Did you go through a book named Bhagavad Gita?
I read a little, I read an English translation of it, a little bit, just to better understand my friends. That's what I do when I meet people from other faiths or things like that, even to this day, particular religious perspective. A lot of times I'll not just that, I'll read about their culture or things like that, especially if I like them.
But
yes.
You didn't find any answer in those books which haunted you in the beginning, like why God is so merciless and things like that. Being merciful, why the word?
No, it was very difficult for me, for that, because Hinduism has, so many scriptures, and the scriptural literature is so vast, and it represents so many perspectives. It's difficult for somebody from the outside, to come and read that and find guidance from it. You know what I mean? Unless you happen to stumble on the right thing. But yeah, for me it was a little bit confusing. And that's not to put it down. It's just that, scriptures in Buddhism and Hinduism could fill, my office, the math department, even more, maybe 4 times that. So you really need to do it would be very difficult, without somebody to help guide you through the process. And, none of my friends in that faith knew it well enough to even deal with my questions. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, because, coming from a Christian background, after I became a Muslim, I understood that, there are parts of the Bible that very much agree with what I'm saying and that point in the same direction. But I read the Bible twice before ever becoming a Muslim. I read it cover to cover twice. Just couldn't find it. So I feel it's there. But, some people will be guided by this, some people will be guided by that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Lang, just thank you for your lecture.
Yes.
I'm a student of theology and a Christian myself.
I hope I didn't say anything that offended you.
No, you didn't. I have a theological question for you, though. Okay.
I can't answer it except I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. But in Christian theology, we believe that God is both merciful and just, to the attributes that you wrote on the board.
Yes.
But we believe that the basis of God's mercy, that the fact that he can forgive us, is based on the fact that he fulfilled his requirement for justice in the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross.
Yes.
how in Muslim theology do you reconcile the two? That God can extend mercy without violating his requirement for justice?
Well, see, because, if you remember, did you get here in the beginning of the lecture?
Mm-hmm.
See, in Christian theology, that whole question, correct me if I'm wrong, begins with the story of Adam, right?
Yeah.
And the story of Adam emphasizes that he sinned and that had to be, what's the word you said again? In terms of justice. That had to be reconciled in terms of justice.
Right.
But in the Quran, if you remember, as I was saying, there's no indication in that version of the Quran of that story that was that big a deal. Are you following me? It was in the Quran, Adam slipped. It's a minor thing. God didn't put us here as a punishment. Are you following me? So God did not feel violated or anything had been violated to such a degree that had to be paid for. I'm just saying from the standpoint of Quran. Adam repented, God forgave him. Adam and Eve, and that's it. Because they're not really here as a punishment. They're here to grow. This is a stage, from the standpoint of the Quran, we weren't just created when we were conceived. We are actually going through a stage of our creation here and now. So it's a different point of view. So the issue of God needing to be, his sense of justice needing to be satisfied, that's not the deal as far as the story of Adam is concerned.